today, and I want to show you a little bit of what we're going to do here. We are going to start with the desired behaviors. What is on your mind when you go into one of those speaking engagements? What is it you're expecting from your participants? What do you want them to do or not do or keep doing as a result of you spending the time doing this presentation? So we're going to start with that. Then we're going to talk about preparation. How are we going to take our presentation to the next level through preparation? Then we're going to have a couple of you go and try out your introductions. And then we're going to talk about delivery. We're going to give you a couple of pointers on how do I deliver an effective presentation? How do I have to change it if I'm delivering on Zoom versus delivering in person? And then we'll have a few more people go. And then we will wrap up by talking about after the speech, what happens. How do we react when we get survey feedback on how we did, and what do we do with that feedback? And then we should still have time, I'm hoping, for any kind of conversation, observations by all of you, and some questions. So with that, I would like to pose the question. I think it would be easy if we did this one in the chat. I would like just some of your thoughts. When you go out and do a presentation, what are some things, what are some behaviors you're trying to stimulate by the people in the class? What are you trying to get them to do? I have this up here that I pulled from your website on a recent thing that you put together. And I'm assuming the desired outcome was for people to visit your website and sign up for the AARP Celebrates You event. So that would be an example. So let me see what's on your mind as you think about, you step in that room, what is it you're trying to get people to do? Okay, thanks very much, Mark. You're trying to engage them and ask questions and have them share their knowledge. Active engagement, a lot of engagement, and getting into the topic, actually, and to learn some things about AARP that perhaps they didn't know before. Maybe they thought you were one thing and now they learn you're so much more. To be inquisitive, yes, to walk away more knowledgeable. And then we have thank you, Doug, for a bit of humor at this time of night, to stop yawning. Yes, we want them to stop yawning. And actually, this isn't even that bad of a time slot. The worst is right after lunch, if you want to really know the truth. To have fun and to be interested and engaged. And I agree with all of those. Those are all things that you would like to have people come away with. And I wrote down a few of my own to have a better understanding of what AARP does and the programs and services it offers, to maybe visit the website more frequently, to consider getting involved in AARP, to sign up for some of the special events, and to stimulate questions when they're out there talking to family and friends. Did you know that they also do this? Did you know that they have a service for that? So just something to think about as you're going in, and this may be helpful for you before you go in and do your presentation. You might want to be thinking this way, so it will force you to integrate into your presentation more interaction with people and a little bit more, perhaps someone said fun. So, maybe that's going to be your cue to have fun with folks. So anyway, let's dive right in right now. So let's talk about the preparation. And my understanding is that you are very lucky to have someone who is a Speakers Bureau liaison on your team that's going to be able to help you with all of those logistics. But I know that when I'm walking in, I want to know, first thing I want to know is this going to be Zoom or in person? Because I'm going to do some things differently. And I will go back to that example of the 2-day PR boot camp for you, okay? So I'm successfully doing this PR boot camp. They're sending me to various cities around the country. I'm having a ball doing it. I will not allow more than 30 people in the room because I want it to be highly interactive. Every time I do one of these things, I come away learning something from some of the participants. So I am loving it. And then COVID happens and all that is shut down. So PRSA comes to me and says, Robin, we have a demand for your PR boot camp class. Would you consider doing it on Zoom? And I thought about it and I said, no, it's just not going to be the same. No, I really don't want to do that. So another year goes by and then they come back to me again and they say, Robin, we have a lot of people who really want to take this class. Can you somehow come up with a format that will make you happy and we can still offer it? So I said, okay, number one, I can't pay attention for more than 3 hours at one time. So I'm going to take 14 hours of material, boil it down to 9. I'll offer it in 3 separate sessions, 3 hours apiece. Number two, I need to be able to break people down into work groups. And so I worked with the technology person to be able to do that. Number three, the size. They've sold it out, this one that's coming up. There's going to be 65 people in the class, which is a lot of people. And so I said, fine, I'm not going to be able to do the personal introductions like I do in person. It's going to take up too much time. So my way around that was to have them all fill out a pre-survey telling me their goals of the class and their challenges. So now I've got some homework to do myself before this next class. I'll go through all of those and I'll present an overview in 5 minutes as opposed to using 20 minutes of going around and having everyone introduce themselves. And then I had to also rethink, how was I going to do some of the homework assignments, train them to get their homework at a central location, do some of the stuff that if they had to read a case, I'd have them do that, not online, because that's just kind of wasted time. So something to think about if you're doing a Zoom versus an in-person. How are you going to change it so it's going to work better to fit that Zoom profile? I always want to know the audience size, but more importantly, I want to know who is in that audience. And I don't know how much of an advanced look you get at the people who are signing up, but you probably have a pretty good idea if you're speaking in front of a certain organization, if it's seniors versus, if it's younger folks, you at least will have a little bit of an idea so that you can tailor your remarks to that group. I also want to know if it's in person, how is the room going to be set up? And in that boot camp example, I want to make sure that they have tables of 4 or 5 people at a little table, because they're going to be breaking down and doing a lot of that work. I want to make sure they have the notebook that goes along with my presentation so they can actively use it. And I'm a pretty low tech. I need obviously a PowerPoint setup, but I'm also a big flip charter. So I want to make sure that I've got a flip chart and markers so that when we're doing the interactive stuff, I can write it down. And we actually visibly post those all around the room so people can remind themselves of what we talk about. So really important to think about your logistics, and lucky for you, you've got someone to help you with that. Next is the presentation review, okay? And so most of mine I am doing from scratch. And my process is that I make an outline first of all the key points that I want to make. And then I go back and I fill it in with color commentary. And I think about where are the points for interaction? Where are the points for the personal story? In your case, you're being given a presentation, and that's great. And it's very effective. And I've seen a lot of them and they're in great shape. But in some ways it puts you at a little bit of a disadvantage for really internalizing that and owning that material, right? So, your task then is to go through it and do what I do, make an outline, think a little bit about where am I going to interject a personal story? Where could I maybe do a little poll and get people talking? So that's, when I approach it, that is my thing. And I will say that it takes a little bit of time to do that, right? Which means you're going to be practicing it and spending time and really thinking about it. And I'll get to that in a minute. For me, effective visuals are an important piece. So you'll see that I pulled some things off of your website for some of my visuals, and sometimes it will cue me to tell a certain story. I also like visuals that are in the category of a picture tells is worth 1,000 words, right? So I don't have to have a bunch of words on that screen. I could have a pie chart that just brings my point home beautifully. And that's all I really need, because at the end of the day, I don't want to be reading off of the PowerPoint. So to my third point, you want to familiarize yourself with the material so you know it really well, but you don't want to memorize it. You don't want to come off like you're just reading or just regurgitating a rote presentation. You want to make sure that you're talking to the audience, and in person, you can make eye contact. It's a lot easier, of course, but you want to make sure that you're familiar enough so you can glance up away from your notes and still know what's going on. And as I mentioned before, you really do want to time it out and leave the time for the Q&A at the end, because there will be some inevitably. So those are just a few things that I use, and I'm Italian, so I really like food. And so I tend to think about the approach to preparing for a presentation as I would a meal. So the tasty appetizer is your opening. And maybe this is going to be something that's related to your passion for AARP New Hampshire. Maybe this is going to be some compelling statistic or story in addition to the agenda review, or maybe you're going to do what I do and open with a poll, some questions to get people thinking. So that's your appetizer, but there's got to be some kind of hook there. And then, of course, your main course, which has been pretty well baked for you by AARP. You've got some great material in there. And I have to tell you that as a person who's lived in their home for 30 years, I really went through and took copious notes on the one about decluttering your home, because we really need to do that. So in any event, you've got one clear voice there because it's being presented to you, but now it's your task to go through and say, where can I interject with a little bit of humor? Where can I interject with a memorable story? So that's your main course. And then we're going to bring it home with dessert, and everyone loves dessert. So you're going to summarize what you went over, and then inevitably there should be some kind of call to action. I just did a presentation earlier this week with one of the women on my brain injury substance use disorder task force. And we were talking to people about the connection between brain injury and substance use disorder. A lot of people don't put those two things together, but when someone has an opioid overdose and they do not have oxygen to the brain for a certain period of time, they are very likely going to have a brain injury. And so our call to action was recognize signs of a brain injury so you can help someone early on in the process. Make sure you know where to send them for extra help. We have the Brain Injury Association of New Hampshire that has tons of resources for you, and what they should actually do. So you want to think about ending your presentation with those kinds of calls to action. And of course, the contact information for more information. And I don't know about you, but when I go to a presentation, I think about it for a while, and maybe I think of a question I could have asked, I should have asked, but it hadn't percolated enough. And then sometimes I'll reach back out to the person and I'll say, hey, I had a question. I was thinking about what you said about media relations. I want to ask you something more about that. So that's an important piece of it as well. Also, another piece on presentation, as I say, don't wing it, practice. So leave yourself time to edit. So this is not cramming for the exam that you're going to take tomorrow. In this particular example, this is something I put together especially for AARP New Hampshire. I had this done about 2.5 weeks ago. And my process, again, was to think about it. Usually I'm thinking when I'm out on my bike or out taking a walk, and I'd be like, oh, I should interject that story. That makes sense. So leave yourself some time to be noodling on it, as we like to say. Also practice out loud. And some people don't like to do that. They're uncomfortable doing that. Some people practice in a mirror, which is even better because then you can watch yourself. But I happen to be thinking about this eliminating the annoying habits, how many times you say or how many times you say, you know. I remember back in those Toastmaster days, you know, people had a nervous little habit like putting their hands in their pocket and jingling change, you know, things like that. And I happened to have a house guest this weekend that is a teacher. And she was telling me about what she does when she coaches the debate team. And we're not going to do this on the call, so don't worry. But she gives all her students these Nerf balls. And then the person who's doing their presentation for the debate does it. And if they slip up and start doing the ums and the nos, they get pelted with the Nerf balls. And that sounds kind of harsh, but it is almost Pavlovian. You get to recognize that you're doing it, and then you'll stop yourself before you do it. But she said it's very funny because you can see the person make the mistake and then brace themselves because they know they're going to be hit by the Nerf balls. So practice out loud, whether you have someone throw anything at you or not is up to you. And then lastly, resist that temptation to just read the PowerPoint. I have death by PowerPoint as my visual up here. All of us can look at the PowerPoint ourselves and read it. What we really want is someone who can tell us some stories and cement the knowledge in our heads so that, you know, they'll remember it better. So that's really my little spiel on preparing. And so now I'm going to turn it over to whatever brave soul, and this is a very non-threatening audience, so everybody should feel pretty comfortable, who would like to give us one of their personal introductions that they prepared as part of the homework. Do we have anyone who wants to go first? Pam's ordering Nerf balls. There must be somebody out there. I had a couple of names. Shall I go on?
I see Eveline raising her hand.
Oh, good.
Sure.
Excellent.
I'll take it first and then learn from the rest of you all the way through. So hello and welcome to our presentation of Prepare to Care. My name is Eveline Barkham, and joining me today are fellow Speakers Bureau volunteers, Jill, my co-presenter, and Iris, our technician for all things audiovisual. Thank goodness, because that's not my forte. Now, before we begin, we do have a couple of ground rules. As much as we want to share, please be sure that everyone gets an opportunity to ask questions or share tips. And in this way, we can all learn from each other. Also know that this is a judgment-free zone and that your opinion is important to us. And lastly, to ensure that all of us are able to cover the materials, we may defer some of your questions and tips until the end of our presentation. So today's discussion is all about supporting you and the people that you care for, which leads me into why I joined AARP and ultimately the Speakers Bureau. I joined as a way to help AARP New Hampshire reach folks in the +50 age group to provide resources in areas where they may need help. And every time I do a presentation for the Speakers Bureau, I learn something new. So this presentation is very near and dear to my heart, as I'm a caregiver for my husband, Ron. At first, when he was at home, I felt somewhat alone in our journey. Who would have known at the age of 60, he would have a stroke? Our world was turned upside down. And I said, oh my goodness, what am I gonna do? But AARP's resources showed me that I am not alone and that there are many places to get information and support. So caring for a family member or a close friend is one of the most important roles that you'll ever play in your life. It may start as it did with me, just driving a loved one to the doctor and helping with his meds. But as time went by, I found that there was a need for me to do more of the household duties, whether it was paying the bills or cooking all the meals. And boy, do I miss those days when Ron used to make me a home cooked meal before I got home from work. So, it just teaches you how much you really miss. But in addition to having to do more at home, as a caregiver, you may find yourself needing to do more time off from work or assisting the person much more in the caring role, as I did. But no matter where you are in your journey of family caregiving, whether it's just beginning to anticipate a need or to help with a big move, or ultimately take care of a family member full time, having a good framework is to help you guide you and the person you're caring for will make the process so much easier. And that's when you really begin to dig into those resources provided by AARP. They're a godsend. So thank you so much for listening, and please be sure and watch for all of the resources we will have at the end of this presentation. So you don't have to write them all down. We'll provide those to you. Thank you so much.
That's going to be a tough act to follow. I'm just saying, you did a great job. Lots of positive feedback in the chat. Couple of things that I noticed. I like the way you laid out the ground rules at the beginning so people knew what to expect. And I love the personal story. People can absolutely relate to what you're saying, and you are not only presenting material, but you've used this advice yourself, I'm sure, so that gives you that street cred. So great job.
Thank you.
Very engaging. You didn't look or sound like you were reading, is one of the comments. Good intro with great details and a good pace. Thank you for bringing that up about the good pace. We're going to get to that when we talk about delivery, because that's an important thing. And a welcoming smile. That's great. Any other comments, observations? How did you feel, Eveline?
There we go. I unmuted myself. Yes. I enjoyed being able to share my story because a lot of people do feel like they're alone. And I think it's important for them to know, and also that it can happen at any time. We had no idea that our life was going to be totally disrupted. And having those resources made me feel so much less alone. And that was very, very important to me.
You can tell you're passionate about it, and that definitely comes through. So, yes,
Eveline, I know you well, and I feel like that intro, if I didn't know you, I would feel like I knew you, and I would be more engaged and trusting of the information you were sharing because you shared something personal about yourself.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, why don't we have another person go, and then we'll continue with getting into the delivery, and then we'll have a couple more people at the end. So who would like to go next? Jim. Jim's raising his hand.
Okay.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, my name's Jim, and I'd like to welcome you to today's AARP presentation called Prepare to Care, Creating a Plan. I'm accompanied by Sue, who will be co-presenting with me, and by Mary, who will be monitoring the chat for any of your questions. We're all volunteer members of the New Hampshire AARP Speakers Bureau. First, I want to relate to you something about the time of day. Now, this is right after dinner this time. I had a professor in college who insisted that while other professors would get upset if they so much as saw you yawn in their class, he was very pleased if you would yawn in his class, because he realized, and he stressed this, that yawning was really an effort on your part, a very conscious effort to stay awake while everything else around you was saying, no, go to sleep, dummy, go to sleep. But you're yawning, you're fighting that urge yourself. So he admitted, or he warned us, I may step down from the podium at some time, and just if I see you yawning, I'll shake your hand and thank you for making that extreme effort for me. And as I recall, he did that. So don't be surprised if, although we are on Zoom, I may do something that equates to shaking your hand. We want to thank you for inviting us here to meet with your group tonight. We think that today's topic is one that's very important to a lot of people, because there are a couple of things that we'd like you, though, to observe during the presentation. First of all, we were all born with one mouth and two ears, probably with good reason. So while we want to hear your experiences, tips you have to offer, and your questions, we need to share the floor so that everyone has the opportunity to speak up whenever they need to. Secondly, while my opinion matters the most, everyone's opinion is important. We need to keep this to be a completely judgment-free zone. And finally, we do have a lot of material to cover tonight. To make sure we get to all of it, we may need to defer some questioning, or defer answering, really, a few of your questions or hearing your experiences until the end. So, what do you think that preparing to care means? And why do I need a plan to do that? Don't I just have to check in on my elderly parents a couple times a week by phone? Or maybe even go over and mow their yard every couple weekends? But what if it's not my parents who are showing signs of needing extensive attention and care, but the person who's been my partner in all of life's ups and downs for the last 50 years? How do I get ready for that? Or what if it's a special needs sibling who requires constant attention and constant assistance and monitoring when our now elderly parents are getting too old to be able to continue supplying that? These situations are obviously very serious and intense caregiving and care receiving ones. And whether they might be highly unlikely in your particular circumstance, or perhaps you are already entrenched in one of these, having a plan in place for it if and when the need arises is as important to you, the caregiver, as it is for your loved one, the care recipient. So let's look now at how to build a framework to make the whole process easier for both you and for the person with whom you will be giving this care.
Wow, that was terrific. And it was humorous. And I think a lot of us will remember the points of humor that you used, but it was also well-paced. And you also gave us a lot to think about in that opening. I was thinking when you were talking about the someone with a disadvantaged sibling that, you know, if anything happens to them, what's going to happen to that sibling? I started thinking to myself, I know some families like that. So a lot of the examples you used were truly relatable.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think
one of my favorite things about Jim is his sense of humor. No matter, anytime I've been on any kind of call with him, he cracks me up. He has this great sense of humor. And I think a sense of humor is a really good way to invite people in. You know, people like to laugh and smile, and some of the topics that we talk about are heavier things. Being a caregiver is not always a light lift. So I think adding some humor and realizing that we're all kind of in it together was a great approach, Jim.
Thank you. And it also helps keep people from throwing things at me.
Yes, exactly.
I guess I scared everybody with that little story. That's great. And I do, and even just some of the memorable, like we all have, you know, 2 ears to listen and 1 mouth, and just the way you did that was very nice. And I liked it. You laid the ground rules down in a nice way, non-threatening.
I can get threatening if I have to.
Yeah, if you have to.
At 6'4", 290, I can be threatening.
But I will tell you that unlike Jim doesn't get rattled by the yawns. If I see someone yawning, I'm just going to switch my attention to somebody who's giving me what I call the knowing nod, right? Who's listening along with me and giving me some of that positive body language. So if you find yourself in that situation and you see someone who's, you know, texting or just not paying attention, I just shift away and I look at somebody else. That's my way of dealing with it. So in any event, that was great. And I definitely learned a couple of things and internalized a couple of things that I want to think about in terms of planning. But so we spent some time on preparation already. Now let's get into delivery. How are we delivering? And we just saw two great examples of delivering an effective opening. So how are we going to connect with the audience? A little bit easier to do this when you're live in person than when you're on a Zoom call, right? So when I am live in that little PR bootcamp class, I am walking the room. I don't really like to be behind a podium, and I don't really need to be behind a podium. I'm not reading notes, so I'm okay roaming the room. And if you have a question at the back of the room, I'm going to go right back there, talk directly to you. Then I might pose the question to everybody else in the room. That's a great point. What do other people think about that? One of the subjects I teach is media relations, and we always get into it on this age-old question of, should you ever go off the record? And so when that usually sparks lots of conversation, and that's when I'll open it up. But I don't necessarily need to be at the front of the room for that. So walking the room and making eye contact with folks, very important. You can't do really either one of those things on Zoom, but what you can do is some active listening. So you can say, if someone gives you a question, you can say, that's a great question. Jim was just asking, how do I handle it if somebody's yawning, for example? You know, you can parrot that back, and that's actually also helpful for somebody who is viewing this after the fact, because they're not going to see all the notes that we put in the chat. So I tried to read off some of those so that it will be part of the recording for people who are viewing this after the fact. And then, just as I did at the beginning, throwing in a poll. How many of us have done the daily crossword puzzle? And I pulled that up from your website as well. Something that will engage them and get people talking, thinking, what have you. I'm a big fan of the icebreaker. So if the group is small enough, then, you know, I typically will spend the time having people go around the room. And in the example of PR bootcamp in person, usually I'll be in a different city, like let's say San Francisco, and people come in a couple days early so they can see the area. So one of the questions I always ask is, where did everybody go to dinner? And that's a good way of me finding out where are the good places to go to dinner in San Francisco. So whatever you have to do it doesn't necessarily even have to be related to the topic, but find some ways to connect. And Laura actually shared this story with me, that one of their presenters at the NACIS Loeb School has a great presence on Zoom, and it looks like she's never looking at her notes. She's always looking up. And the secret is that right above her, she has some of her cue words posted on the wall. So she's actually is looking at her notes, but you would never know that because she's just looking up, and it doesn't look like that at all. So that was another good finding ways to connect. She also said that same instructor is really good at noticing things in the background, like the ukulele in Eveline's case, for example, and building that into the presentation. So finding ways to connect, that's definitely part of delivery. And then once you have them after your tasty appetizer and you've gotten them hooked, how do we keep their attention? And I think both of you that just went, both Eveline and Jim, did a great job with voice inflection. Now I have to say, this was one of my difficult areas because I have a deep and kind of monotone voice to begin with. So I have to really work on voice inflection, and that gets tiring when you're doing a 2-day presentation. It really does, let me tell you. At the end of that, I don't really want to talk to anybody. I have spent all my energy, but it is important. And I was trying to think of a good analogy, and one of the analogies I came up with, so I do through the our leaders program that Rotary has, Amesbury Rotary has, we all have a reading buddy, and we go into the classroom and we read with a kid for a half an hour a week. And my particular girl this year she speaks 2 languages, English and Portuguese. So she's a little bit behind in terms of reading. And she also does not have a long attention span. So I am getting great voice inflection practice every time I go in and read to her, because I have to make it really engaging. And then I will think of a way to involve her. If I've been reading too long, I'll say, I'll stop. Like this past week, the word frown was in there, and I turned and I said to her, do you know what a frown is? And she didn't. And so we sat there for a minute, we practiced making a frowning face. So, knowing when you are losing, I could see her kind of looking around and not paying attention. That's when to draw them back in with some kind of interactive question, just as you would a first grader. Another thing that's great, you can do a pause for dramatic effect, and it's okay to repeat key points. Voice inflection, very important. It will make people stop. And then I think both of you that went just now did a great job on your cadence. You didn't rush it, which is great. And sometimes when we're nervous, the 2 times that I find people rush is A, when they're nervous, and B, when they have a lot of material to cover and they don't think they're going to get through it all. So my advice on that is, if you practice and you time it out, you're not going to have that problem. So those are a couple of things to think about. Also, I like to live by this rule, no participant left behind. So we want to start from a common denominator of knowledge. And I have this little funny cartoon about DUDE for the acronym Department of Unusual Developing Economics. There are so many acronyms out there, and I'm sure there's plenty in AARP. I already know there are because I've been on your website. So when we use one, we have to make sure we define it for people. And I told you about the Social Security assignment, and I got to be pretty fluent in their language, but inevitably I'd go down and someone would toss one out and I'd have to go, wait a minute, I don't know that one. Someone define that acronym for me. So if you are going to be referring to it, you've got to define it. And then, bring people back. Don't assume that everybody knows. And Laura did a great job of this when she was introducing the NACI Loeb school. She said, for those of you who aren't familiar with NACI Loeb, and she gave us a couple of tidbits. So we were all starting on the same page in terms of our knowledge. So no participant left behind. And then help them follow along. Now we're going to move to talking about delivery. We already talked about preparation. Now we're going to move to talking about delivery. Or if someone brings up a question, that's a great segue to the next part of my presentation, which is going to be on how do we follow up our presentation. Those of you who've had the Toastmasters training know that they go by that. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And it's just a nice way to bring it all full circle. So I'm going to ask a couple of people more to volunteer, but before I do that, let me just ask some of you, what are some ways that you have worked on your delivery aside from the things that I just mentioned? Maybe you have some tricks that you want to bring up and share with the rest of us. One of the things I've observed in our presentations is that we are not great with transitions. Topics do run together. Okay, so sometimes the pause is all you need. Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you're operating off of an outline or something, you can just put it in caps to remind yourself. Okay, now we're going to move to the next part of it. Okay, I see Doug has his hand up. Doug, would you like to ask a question? Oh, you're muted though. There we go.
In terms of the delivery, one of the things that I've realized is certain combinations of syllables cause me to stumble very badly. And the more I practice a presentation, the more I know what to look for, and I will maybe massage those words a little bit so that they roll off my tongue. Too many consonants, I start tripping up. More vowels and the placement to make the big difference to me. And the more I practice it, and typically slowing down, I don't run the words together and fall on my face.
Great advice. And that's why you practice out loud, right? Evelyn just put something in the chat here that she says she practices with her phone camera, and then she uses the timer on that, which is another way to do it. And then I think there's a comment above that. Let me see if I can get to that. Same thing, camera function. Another person, Jill, was saying that, and watches herself so she can make the pauses part of her presentation. Yeah, lots of recording the practice, verbal, on video. So yeah, that is a good way. And I think that's a great point, Doug, because sometimes too with the acronyms, you know, it gets very difficult to spit those out. So if and I've also found that if it's a word that I'm really not that familiar with and I need to work on it, then I'll look up the phonetics and I'll just make sure I know how to deliver that. I've had that happen before. I am an English major, so I know a lot of words, but I don't know all of them. So I think that's good. Any other tips or anything else that people want to share in terms of either preparation or delivery that help you? Yeah, I think we've got it. So why don't we now have another volunteer?
I'll
Who would?
volunteer.
Oh, okay, great. Jill.
I'll jump in there.
Wonderful.
Although those are two hard acts to follow.
That is okay.
I'll start out by saying I'm very glad that you're here with us today for our presentation on Prepare to Care. And I'm from the New Hampshire Speakers Bureau. I'm here with Iris, who is our tech whiz, and Mary, my co-presenter. And I am part of the Speakers Bureau because I find that working to enhance the quality of life through programs like this that we give throughout the state is a big part of the Speakers Bureau's activity, and it's part of AARP in general. Before I start, we do have some ground rules. We ask that you watch your contributions so that we have a chance to hear from everyone. And the other thing is that this is a judgment-free zone. We really want to hear your opinion, but everyone's opinion matters to us. We've got a lot of great ideas to share, and we have a lot of material to cover. So we may need to defer some of your questions and tips until we get to the end of the presentation. We'll be talking about the many ways of supporting you and the people you care for in this discussion. So share with us ideas that you might have. We're always happy to hear that, and it does help you connect with other family caregivers as well. Caring for a family member or close friend isn't a role that most people seek out, but it is one that is needed and valued, whether you're in the same house, in the same town, a few miles away, still in the same state, or in my case, across the country. I'm helping care for my 91-year-old mom. She's in a senior residence in Michigan, not very nearby at all. And I'm involved in everything from her personal and medical care. I pay her bills, I handle all her financial details, and I arrange for her transportation when she goes to the doctor, or if she needs emergency care, which we just went through an extended hospital stay. So it's difficult for both of us that we're not together, but we've worked this out. It's taken some time to figure out an arrangement. There are challenges. And I think that's an important point that we all need to hear, whatever part of the family caregiving journey that you might be on, there are going to be challenges. But developing these strategies and guidelines and setting expectations will really help the person you're caring for and will help you. So I want to get started now with the presentation, Prepare to Care. And we know that we've got great material, great ideas to give you and inspire you on your caregiving journey.
Terrific job. And there's a great observation. And I was making this observation actually in my head, but it got typed in the chat. Love how Jill is listing the different things she does. Different attendees will relate to different things. And it's true. You all covered some of the same stuff about no judgment zone, and we want to hear from everybody, and we've got a lot of material to cover, and some of those same points got made by everybody, but in different ways and with different memorable stories. And I think that is exactly what I was talking about in terms of making the presentation yourself, internalizing it, and actually bringing a human face to it. So I think that was my observation.
Having listened to 3 of these now, and knowing all of these volunteers, their personalities are coming through, which is just making me smile because we have so many awesome volunteers in our Speakers Bureau, and I would hate for anyone to feel like they are like a robot reading these scripts. So to have you using some of those tips and really, like we said in the homework assignment, putting your own paint on the canvas, it's so much more fun to listen to. It's great.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it a lot. There was one comment though. Iris does not want to be referred to as the tech whiz. Okay, that's what she said. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just reading the chat. So what would you like to be called, Iris? Tell us what to say. Tell them what to say.
Well, it's not always me, so they have to be able to address who's ever doing technology. So I think that they could just say Iris is here to support our technical aspects, or we sometimes say to run the PowerPoint and the polls or whatever, because
Okay.
I'm not going to tell people how to fix their cameras when they don't work, and I don't.
She doesn't want the expectations to be set too high. I think
Very
that's what
low
she's
is
saying.
good, yes.
Yeah. All right, I think we have time for another one because we have a little bit more to cover, but we'll still have time. So who else would like to go? I think we should have another.
I'll
Oh,
go.
okay.
When I offered to do this, I was not suffering from having my eyes dilated, which they have been today. So I'm seeing sort of, but I'm going to make the effort.
Good for
Hello
you.
and welcome. Yeah. Okay. So hello and welcome to our presentation of Prepare to Care. I am Karen, an AARP New Hampshire Speakers Bureau volunteer. And my colleague, Mary, and I will be conversing with you today on the important topic of caregiving. Bev and Iris will be joining us. Bev is moderating the chat and Iris is running the PowerPoint. Let's take a few minutes right now to give some care to as to how we converse with one another today. If you have a question to ask, a story to tell, a comment to make, a tip to share, or anything that you might want to add, let's remember to be brief so that everyone has a chance to speak. I have always believed that we have something to learn from everyone. And we want to hear from all of you today. So, because your opinion is very important. Let's also keep this a judgment-free conversation. We have lots of material to cover today. And to make certain that we cover it all, we may have to hold some of your comments or your questions to the end, but we will do our best to get to all of that. I'd like to start this conversation with a quote by our former First Lady, Rosalind Carter. She said, "There are 4 kinds of people in the world. There are those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers." Let's think about that for a moment. I fit in the category number 4. I'm going to be needing a caregiver, I feel fairly certain, soon, because I'm in my 84th year and things are beginning to break down. If you're wondering whether or not you should be here today, well, according to Rosalind, you belong in one of those groups. So we're going to be talking about ways that you can support yourself and the ones that you're caring for. This is your opportunity to share tips, to ask questions, to get ideas, to connect with people who are just like you. I think Mrs. Carter's quote brings home the message that caring for a family member or a dear friend is one of the most important roles you will ever play in your life. You may start by driving your friend to the hospital or to the doctor or maybe to the supermarket. But as time goes on, you may find that you will have to devote much more time as your loved one begins to depend more and more on you. If you are working, you might even have to take some days off. And in some cases, you might find that you will have to stop working altogether, as many caregivers have had to do. Regardless of where you are on this journey, whether you're just beginning to think about a need, or you're helping a friend make a major move, or you're involved in full-time care, if you have a good framework established to guide both you and your loved one through this process, you will find it so much easier. So let's get this conversation started.
Beautiful. I really, really love the quote that you used and the, I guess, validity for everybody that they belong in that room. That, you know, whether they are one of those 4 people, they belong in that room listening. And I thought that that was really well done. And I also have to say, a lot of street cred coming from someone who's saying, hey, I'm going to be needing some care. So I think you put it out there as a very positive role model.
Thank you.
Other comments?
And
I see some-
again, you know, Karen just has one of those welcoming personalities. I think she is someone who exudes, let me take care of you, let me help you, let me support you. And I think that that came through in how she kind of reframed the whole intro to that presentation.
I agree. And I want to capture this that was in the chat that I didn't see before. It says, we have a lot of presentations, but what this is pointing out is that we should do the ones that are most meaningful to us when we can. And I love that. It's true. And everybody who's spoken has given something, a good example of why it's so meaningful for them to be giving the presentation. Let's see what else we have in this chat. I loved all the presenters' stories and all the way their personalities were reflected. And great to see so many in the Speakers Bureau. And I agree with that. I think it's fantastic. So why don't we now finish it up by talking a little bit about what do we do when things don't go so well. I don't know if anyone's had this happen, but I like to call it, how well can you roll with the punches? Because what can go wrong might. And, you know, the cartoon here, we never throw our computers out the window. Our computers are so important to us, but sometimes we do want to just throw them out the window because they're not cooperating. I think you need to be prepared to carry on when the technology fails, and just keep your cool and just, well, we're going to have to pivot to doing it this way. You know, sometimes you never know when the cable's going to go out and you're going to lose your connection on Zoom. I've done presentations on both Zoom and Teams, and we had a great example, actually. This was during COVID, and our firm had volunteered to do a piece on communicating during COVID-19. So we put together this special presentation for our chapter, and lo and behold, the host of the call, it was terrible. Like, you could hear every third word. And we had a lot of people on that call. We had like 50 people on that call, to the point where we said, okay, we need to redo this. So actually Laura saved the day. She volunteered. The NACI Loeb School would be the sponsor, and we redid everything, and it came out great the second time. But that, you know, none of us as presenters could do anything about that. We just had to carry on, and it was really frustrating for the people in the audience. Luckily, we were able to all come together and do it again. But what will you do? Can you do the material? Do you know it well enough that you don't have to lean on the PowerPoint? Do you have a hard copy of at least your outline with you so that you could at least do it that way? And, you know, two things I always do. Number one, I insist on getting, if it's a Zoom call, I want to get on 15 minutes prior, just to make sure everything's working, share my screen, all that stuff. And then the backup is, actually Laura has a copy of this presentation. If for some reason mine was not working, she was going to be able to queue it up. But when I'm presenting in person for one of those boot camps, I get there an hour before, because I want to make sure the room's set up the way I want. I want certain things written on the flip chart when the students walk in. I want to make sure all the notebooks are where they're supposed to be. And I've been doing it long enough that we've had, you know, the notebooks didn't come, so now I've got to kind of scramble around a little bit. You have to be ready to think on your feet and not let it rattle you. So I'm going to stop that and say, has anyone got a story to share about when they had to roll with the punches and how they handled it? Or does everything go perfectly for you guys every time? Because that's not been my experience.
I can share one, and I will undo my video, even though I'm wearing an ugly shirt, which is another thing we should talk about, is how we look when we go to presentations and not like this. One of our first, I think, in-person or speakers bureaus, or maybe not our first, was over at the Robert somebody houses, I can't know, Richard Brown houses. We got there, went beforehand, because a lot of times in person, I'll go a day or two before to check out the technology. Everything was working. We got there. Their maintenance man decided to change everything and refused to help us, so we had no presentation. But we did have paper copies, so everybody had paper copies. And we've been talking about, as we go back, should we have paper or what our strategy is going to be. But Carol Hall was with me, and we just presented. We had our notes. We were able to present. It was a small group. There were a couple things that really we wanted up on the screen. We gathered them around my laptop and we showed them the videos. We could do them 1 or 2 times if we needed to. And like you said, we just rolled with the punches. We apologized for not having it working. And that's what we did. We also try to know our technology pretty well. That's the other thing, to be prepared. Because I had one at Ollie last week. We went into the week before, made sure everything was working. And they promised us that everything would be set up. We got there, no chairs in the room set up. My presenter was really nervous, which is why I was there with him, about technology. Go to turn on the computer, it wouldn't go on. It was their computer. Looked around and noticed that it wasn't plugged in. So I go, well, there's no cabling. There was absolutely no cabling on it. Nick handed me a bunch of wires and said, I hope you know what to do with this. So we plugged in the wires, we got everything working. He was able to calm down, but you really just have to be prepared for any circumstance. The other thing we do is, both at Ollie and here, is we tell our presenters a lot of times, like you said, make sure somebody else has a copy of your presentation, because I've told some of our Ollie presenters, if you get thrown out, dial into the Zoom call, use your telephone. You can still speak to the presentation and I'll run your slides for you. And in hours where we do 2 people on Zoom, there's been a couple times we've lost somebody and the other presenter will step in and say, I'll take it from here until so-and-so gets back. So those are some of the ways we work around that stuff.
Those are all great examples, and absolutely being able to do it. And I like the apology for the inconvenience. Absolutely. People understand that technology doesn't always cooperate, but they also appreciate what we would call in our business issue anticipation. We had these conversations before this call, and I said, if something happens, I'll dial back in and Laura will have it. So and someone just wrote in the chat that they had to put it on the laptop and run it around the room, I think. Yeah, it says, I had someone show up to make a presentation. We couldn't get the computer to talk to the AV equipment, so I had to carry his laptop around so everyone could see the slides. So, and then in that case too, you can always offer the copy of the PowerPoint after the fact. So, and that goes to my point, just know your material well enough so you can still deliver it, and then they can get the PowerPoint copy after the fact. So, great.
I think you had mentioned also, preparing in advance. And I think the fact that, like, we go to places and check out the stuff,
yes,
so that you could actually say to the audience, we were here last week and this was all working, kind of makes them realize that you were prepared too, instead of just walking in and expecting everything. I travel with a screen and a projector just in case. So
yeah, I was gonna say, always nice to have it like a backup on your laptop. And then some, when I'm traveling with PRSA, they at least have the technical support that they'll come into the room. And even if it's at a hotel, those people will come into the room and, make sure everything's going the way that you want it. And then I really probably couldn't do the boot camp without a technical assistant, because if you have 65 people that you're breaking in and out of breakout groups, that takes a little while. So he has my list in advance and he handles that. So I'm not stressed out. All I have to do is say, please put me into room 1. Now put me into room 2. So he does all that maneuvering. I would be stressed out trying to figure that out while I was also trying to listen and contribute and teach. So it sounds like you all have that as well with your technical assistants that come on site. So that makes a lot of sense. So just wrapping up, just to make the point that we're really never done learning. And back to my point at the beginning, your presentation can always get better. Every time you do it, it's going to be better. I do have a piece that I shared with Laura and also with Pam called Effective versus Waste of Time Speakers Bureau. So if anyone's interested in getting that, you can get it from them, just with a few thoughts on maximizing. And it has to do with taking multiple people to the event, because it's nice for someone else to be making note of what are some of the questions that came up and how they were handled. And somebody who, if it's the type of thing where you're asking for, I usually have what I call a little teaser. Oh, if you'd like a copy of this, give me your business card. So somebody to help you with all of those kinds of things, I think is really good. And someone to kind of read the room and help troubleshoot with all those little things. If you have not looked at the Toastmasters website in a while, I would recommend going there. They have some great resources on there. And Laura was just telling me that in the month of May, the Naki Loeb School is going to be offering a 4-part series on public speaking. So Laura, if you're on and want to do a little commercial for yourself, now might be a good time to do that.
Great, thank you. I would love to. So the Naki S. Loeb School of Communications is going back to in-person classes this spring, which we're excited about. If you are interested, we have a number of classes that we're offering, one of which is public speaking, and it's about improving public presentations with Professor Andrea Bard from Southern New Hampshire University, who has been teaching public speaking both at SNHU and for the Loeb School for about 15 years now at our school and about 30 years at the college. So you can sign up for that at our website, which is loebschool.org. That's LOEB school.org/register, or just go to our homepage and you'll see a link there to register for classes. It's on a red button with white letters. And I will also add that to the chat so that if you're able to copy it down and want to take a look later, we'd love to have you. Those in-person classes will be running in May, 4 consecutive Wednesdays. So May 4th, May 11th, May 18th, and May 25th. And the classes in the evening, about the same time as us gathering here tonight, starts at 5:30 p.m. and ends at 7. We'd love to see you there. We're also offering classes in misinformation, which is a topic that we've been really proud to partner with AARP New Hampshire on teaching in the past at the Loeb School. We're also offering a class in flash storytelling using video to produce quick stories in forums like TikTok and Facebook Live, and a class in crisis communications, as well as a really exciting first-time offering in citizen journalism. So if you're interested in helping local news outlets do a better job of covering what's happening in your community, you might want to take that one too. So take a look. I'll put the note in the chat now.
I beat you to it, Laura. I put a couple of notes in the chat.
Thank you so much, Robin. That's perfect.
Pam, did you want to talk about any other AARP resources that people should be mindful of?
Sure. Well, I think the easiest one is all of us within the Speakers Bureau. We are all here to form little groups to help with anything that you need help with. Like tomorrow, Jill's coming over my house to do a 1-hour training on PowerPoint. So I'm always happy to help. I know that many people in this group have lots of different skills and are more than happy to share them. So if there's something that you feel like you need a little extra support in, if you want to practice presentations, PowerPoints, any of that, reach out to me, and then I can filter out your request and match you with someone who can help you take that to the next level. In addition to that, I think you all know that AARP offers a lot of trainings for our volunteers. I know last week when we some of us met with Bob, who did our Getting Comfy with PowerPoint training. He mentioned that there are some more PowerPoint trainings coming up, as well as some other things. So keep an eye on emails that you're getting from AARP about what's coming up specifically for volunteers.
That's great. I did want to go back in the chat because I missed this one. One important tip in person before you get started, ask everyone if they can see and hear. Give them time to move if they need to. And that's a really basic thing to do, but also a very good point. And when I'm in the room an hour before mine, I go to the back of the room and I say, can I see this from the back of the room? And I kind of check that out, but it's nice. And I usually ask people, do I need to mic up or can you hear me? And in a small group, I can project pretty well. So a lot of the times I don't mic up, but it depends on the room and the size and all of that. So anything else that either I didn't cover and people would like to bring up, or just some thoughts that maybe got stimulated? We talked about a lot of things today. We talked about being mindful of the outcomes you want from the presentation before you even get to the presentation. We talked about the way to prepare, getting all the logistics down, making your outline, inserting your personal stories. We talked about making sure that you've timed it out so that you're going to be able to do it in the prescribed time so that you're not going to be rushing. We've talked about how do you work on, keep their attention with voice inflection, dramatic pauses, repeating important points, all of those kinds of things. And then, oh, I do have one thing that we didn't talk about, the follow-up, the celebrating successes and making improvements on those. And I will say, for all of the sessions that I do, there's a little Survey Monkey that goes out with a couple of questions because my course gets repeated. And I look at all those. And of course, I celebrate when people say I've done a great job and all of that. And you can't help it. You zero in on the one thing where people say, well, I wish you spent more time on this, or I didn't like this particular part of it. You've got to take all that with a grain of salt, of course. But, you know, if enough people say it, you say, well, gee, maybe I should redo the curriculum and spend a little more time on that, because clearly people are wanting that. So that's the purpose of any kind of survey. We shouldn't take it personally. We should make sure that we pat ourselves on the back for the things that went well, and then we should be open to constructive criticism so we can make an improvement the next time. And I do, when I have time, I will watch my recording after the fact, so I can pay attention to what I thought went well and what I thought, I think it was Doug that was talking about slipping up on, you know, if there's too many syllables that have the alliteration or the same letters, and sometimes you stumble on them. So I make note of all that, and I'd say I've got to do a better job on that next time. But other than that, I think, you know, it's the more you do it, the better you're going to be at it. So I don't know if anyone has anything that they want to add or even ask.
Can I ask a question? Slightly different topic. Can you relate ways to handle a difficult audience member?
Difficult audience member, yes. And I think meaning they are being, you know, pushing back at you. And
They could be pushing back at you. They could be like constantly wanting to ask questions, you know, every time you open the floor, or they just unmute themselves. They could be falling asleep, you know, and snoring. I don't know.
well, the falling asleep, I just don't focus on them. I just look at someone who's actually paying attention. And I've learned not to take that personally too, because I know that in that class that I'm going to do, that's going to have 65 people in it, there's probably going to be 20 that are what I call actively engaged, typing in the chat, raising their hands. There's going to be another 20 that, you know, are multitasking and half listening until I call them all into their groups, and then they're accountable to do the work. But like, there's nothing you can do about that. But in terms of the behavior of things, I have done some things like, okay, well, let's see, you know, we've heard from Joe. So are there other people that might have a question? Or if they keep, you know, raising their hand, if I've already called on them enough, I'll start with other people. If they're pushing back because they don't agree with the point that you have, or they have some different information, you know, you just have to kind of handle that gracefully and say, okay, well, you know, from where I sit or from my knowledge base, this is what I have always practiced, and that's, to me, what is the best practice. Doesn't mean there aren't some other points of view out there. If they're being rude, it's just, I think the class kind of, the rest of the people in the class will let them know, not appropriate, you know? I don't know if that's helpful.
Sorry. I think it does help. It's something we have to consider as we start going it back, especially in person.
Yeah, and I think you all in your openings kind of talked about, we have a lot of people, so, and a lot of materials, so we might not get to everybody's question, and we're going to do the best we can. And I think that's all anybody can ask, is that you're going to do the best that you can. So, but yeah, I haven't had anyone, throw anything at me or, stomp out of the room. I haven't had those situations, which is good. Oh, I like this. Pam typed into the chat. My call to action is for you to try something you learned tonight at your next presentation. That's a good call to action. Good addition to dessert, Pam. I like it. Well, if there's any other, thank you for the comments about this being helpful. I hope my measure of a successful presentation is hopefully you learned at least either you learned one new thing or you were reminded of one new thing, because I think we all know a lot of this stuff, but sometimes it escapes us and we need to be reminded. And I'm going to thank you for inviting me. I said, this is kind of a lot of pressure giving an effective presentation on giving an effective presentation, but it helped me. And so I'll remember some of these things the next time I'm presenting as well. So thank you all.
Thank you, Robin. I actually had thought how hard an audience this might be, because these are people who are out there doing this all the time, and they're obviously really skilled, as we saw tonight. So thank you for your comments and for your advice. Thank you, Pam and AARP New Hampshire, for inviting the NACIA Slope School to partner with you on this presentation. And I was really excited to see you all here and to hear from you this evening. We're going to conclude the class now. We're so happy to have had you here, and I hope I see you back at the Loeb School again. Take care, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone. Good luck.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks, Robin.
You're so
Paul,
welcome.
for being
Thank
a great
you.
audience.
Thanks.
luck.
Bye, everybody.
Good night. Bye-bye.